Alright, this is a second attempt on my second video of this newly launched autism channel that I'm trying to navigate um, how to make a channel, how to be consistent and not let my own self-doubt get the best of me and just keep me from really continuing this process, when I think if I just stick with it, over time, hopefully I'll be able to improve in a number of ways in terms of like editing and graphics and, the equipment I'm using, which right now is just my computer and a little table propped up in front of my bed. So not the fanciest look. I know it takes a lot more to cut it in the YouTube world. And I obviously have a long way to go, but hopefully you can appreciate my shirt. And if not, then I guess we have different opinions in fashion choices and the statements that we choose to wear. But anyway, before I just babble on about nothing, which I'm very capable of doing, the last video that I attempted to record was earlier today, and it ended up being like 30 minutes, which for me is a little bit too long. I think just in the world we live in, with our attention spans being slowly siphoned into ever shorter increments because of social media, I really don't want to go above like 20 minutes. And I think today I really felt the need, the urge to make a video because I had the time. I don't always have the time. I'm usually with my daughter, and tending to her needs as an autistic child and my needs as an autistic adult and just life. So today is one of the days where I have some time to myself. I do get time to myself. As I stated in my last video, I have a very small but very mighty and loving support system of my parents and myself. And we kind of rotate, and that way we can all have little breaks, because having an almost 5-year-old child who developmentally is still closer to a toddler's age is difficult for a number of reasons. Mainly, I know for my parents who are in their late 60s and early 70s, and even for myself, it's just the, you know, place that she's at developmentally in her mind versus the size and strength of her body, which is hard, is probably the hardest thing that I personally deal with right now, as an autistic mother of an autistic child with more higher support needs than I have, and very different support needs in a lot of ways. So I think when I tried to talk earlier today, maybe it was just like an attempt at a warm up, and I talked about a lot of things, but I don't tend to write out what I'm going to talk about ahead of time. I have been a writer in my past life, and was encouraged to be a writer at various points in my life, but obviously my own self doubt got the best of me, and because of some traumatic events, it's become something that I'm really not able to do currently. And I'm working through that and many other triggers in therapy right now. So, at least for the foreseeable future, the videos that I make will just be kind of off the dome, spur of the moment. I mean, I want to have topics to talk about, but I don't necessarily have things planned out to a T, which I know some people prefer to do for their videos, to make it more, condensed and succinct. And while I would like to get to that at some point, it's just not really something I can do right now. So that's my reasoning. And I feel like I sound very congested, but it is like the polar Arctic outside, so I think everybody's dealing with a bit of winter congestion. But what I did think that I could talk about today without making this too long and getting into too much depth or need of research is to really just share a little bit of some of my personal experience a little more before I get into maybe some more of the nuanced topics that I'd like to talk about in the future. Um, as I stated in my previous video, my daughter was diagnosed with autism level 3 in June of 2023, um, at a city near where I live, at a hospital that specializes in autism diagnosis for children and adults. And so we brought her there after, several different steps in that process of like seeing a pediatrician and then seeing a local nurse that specialized in autism, and then getting her on the wait list for an official diagnosis, which was relatively quick, considering the numbers we were originally quoted. I mean, there's several centers in the state that I live in, but many of them were like years out. And so I called all of them, and just put my name on all of them. And one of them was luckily shorter than the other, I think three, because I think there's a total of four in my state. And within a year, she was able, around a year, to get her diagnosis. And then a little over a year later, after I had saved up my own money because hers was covered by insurance because she's a child, I was able to save up the cost of, it was $2,500 for a psychological evaluation that took place at a different facility, because the facility where my daughter went, while they do assess adults with autism, was currently not accepting new patients. So I had to find another facility, and thankfully, there was not as much of a waiting list for them, but it was also, you're paying out of pocket. So I think there's definitely a cost barrier in place of those places, which is maybe why I was able to get in sooner than if I had tried to go somewhere where I could have possibly gotten it covered by insurance. Although I haven't really seen where many adults or people in general can get psychological assessments covered by their insurance. I think it tends to be psychiatric assessments or medical evaluations, but from what I have known personally, but I could be wrong because I am just one person, it seems like psychological assessments, while they should be the foundation of any, I think, starting point of mental health assessment and treatment plan, don't seem to be considered as the starting point. And typically it starts usually with psychiatry in the hospital in times of severe crisis, whereas I think psychologists can give a lot more of a holistic profile. So anyway, again, I'm getting off topic, as I do, and as I always will, because that's just how my brain works. So I have to not apologize for it, because I'm just done apologizing for being the person that I am. Can't be any other way. I've tried very hard for most of my life to my own personal detriment. So this is who I am. It even says it in my psychological profile that I ramble on and overly inclusive of intimate details and things like that. I forget exactly how it was worded, but it was a really nice burn from a professional psychologist that I found very funny, even though it was also very accurate and kind of like embarrassing to be like, oh yeah, that's me. But anyway, so that is all to say, my daughter was diagnosed in June of 2023, and after saving up, I was diagnosed in July of 2024. And it started initially in, I believe it was April. I reached out or maybe earlier than that, I reached out to the doctor to kind of express my interest in what I was looking for, sort of some of the tests I had taken previously, like the CAT4, something like that, something that you can take online, and giving them that information sort of like preliminarily, and then just a brief overview of what I was looking for. And they got back to me right away. We were able to schedule the first initial talk session, which was like 1 to 2 hour session of just kind of an what do you call it, like a overview, family history, kind of about my life and what brought me here and the things that I felt important. And then they did ask, sort of probing questions from that conversation. And then in the second session that happened weeks later was in person and was a 4 hour long session. It could have been longer, but I opted to go home early and finish the final test at home. So it should have been maybe closer to 5 hours, but I did 4 hours in the office. And then the fifth hour, I took the test from a link on my computer at home, because I wanted to get home, because I don't really like to be away for very long. So something I'll say about those tests is and I thought it at the time was, she remarked on how she was happy that I was very eager to take the tests. I found them very exciting and stimulating. I mean, I was excited to be engaging in something that I felt could be positively impacting my well-being in the future with this information. So I really did want to give it my all. And I realized that sometimes in situations, often psychological evaluations are, from what I've heard, typically ordered in like legal settings for criminal trials or custodial things. And so oftentimes people are forced to get psychological evaluations as like a stipulation of their release or their sentencing. And so I can imagine that half of the time, my cat's here, half of the time when people are taking these evaluations, they're probably a bit reluctant to do it, and that would skew the data probably to their detriment if they're not giving it their all, because then you really can't get an accurate profile if you're screwing around on a lot of the tests that are meant to rule out things like, or determine if you have ADHD or how you process like the different ways in which you learn. If you're just kind of messing around and doing it lazily, then you're not going to get an accurate score, and that's to your own detriment. So I would say to anybody that does consider getting a psychological evaluation, not only is it a financial investment, but it should really be something that you're willing to give your all into, to make sure that the information that you're given is as valid and accurate and useful to you as possible, because it's only going to be as good as the effort you put in. So, I didn't try to like mask anything or lean into anything. I just really tried to give it my all. One of the things I had thought before I was diagnosed with PTSD was that perhaps I had ADHD. Multiple people, like a couple people that I know that had autism and ADHD, or had ADHD, had expressed that they thought, based on the way I presented and their lay opinion, that I had ADHD. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm open to that, and it was determined based on my collateral evaluations, which are typically like assessments that are written by people who have known you for a long time. So in this case, it was my mom and dad writing assessments. It was ruled out that I had ADHD because the signs were not present in childhood. I was an extremely organized child, like to a painful point. I was so rigid and so like meticulous and controlling, and if anything, very, very much exhibited a lot of what would be considered, I think, autistic traits, but not ADHD traits. So that allowed me really to, those collateral assessments and my, trying to do well, or my best of my ability on like the ADHD tests, allowed the doctor to rule out ADHD, which then left the diagnosis of PTSD, because there were other symptoms that are shared, I think, between both. I don't know if they're disorders specifically. Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder and attention hyper deficit disorder. So it really did help inform what I was actually dealing with, and that's why I feel so confident in the diagnoses that I received, because I can say that I gave it my all, and I didn't hold back in any of my shame or ugliness, or things that maybe I often don't want people to know in, casual settings. But in dealing with medical professionals, I really wanted them to have an accurate picture, because ultimately I wanted this to lead to a better outcome for me and my family and my child. And so the only way that could happen is if I was really forthcoming as much as possible. So that was good, and those assessments then led me in July, after several weeks of my psychologist compiling all of the testing that I had done on the computers, in person, her observations, kind of summarizing that into about a 28-page report. Then I finally saw her in July and was given the official diagnoses, and I was really scared. I was really nervous. I was so afraid that I was gonna, I don't know, either I'd be given the same diagnosis I had been given before, which, on one hand, like, would have been valid data, but would have also been a blow, because then it would have just been like 20 years of failed medication and treatments, and then what else is there to do but have like a lobotomy at this point, and I'm kind of joking. That's just my dark humor. I apologize, but or I don't apologize. I find it funny, but I don't mean to offend others. This is just me being me, unmasked. So take it or leave it. By all means, it's YouTube. You can click off. And so yeah, I mean, it was really helpful. It was very, I think, initially validating, very validating, kind of a bit surreal. I think even to this day now, we're almost 6 months in, and I think a lot of autistic people deal with this. I have a hard time believing that I'm autistic, because it's just so deeply, I think, ingrained in me from just negative self-talk and misdiagnoses in the past, that I still hold on to those old tapes telling me that it's all in my head, and that I'm the problem, and I'm just choosing this, or I'm just whatever negative tape wants to play in my head. So initially there was like a bit of euphoria, of relief, of validation, and even though it didn't necessarily fix any of my struggles or erase the pain of the past, it gave a different outlook at how to view what I had been going through and why things had failed so miserably for so long, because it wasn't a proper treatment, because the proper, my neurodevelopmental disorder was not being treated. My sensory issues were not being honored. My struggles with interpersonal effectiveness, emotional regulation, executive functioning were never addressed. I was given medication to help people that had, in my previous diagnosis, bipolar type 2 depressive. At times they even tried to say I was rapid cycling, because my moods would switch so quickly. And so, there were all these different like terms thrown at me in the bipolar category, and then later on from other professionals in passing, like borderline. And so it left me with a lot of questions, because I had received that diagnosis so early on in my life at 15, and taken so many antipsychotics and different kinds of medications to treat a completely different illness, that once I finally had autism as the diagnosis, it really changed my treatment approach. I mean, I'd been off all of the bipolar medications for years, because they really were not effective. And if anything, it was like, what's the point in taking something that's not even helping to curb whatever these symptoms that I'm experiencing are? So I finally, even before I had the diagnosis of autism, began a regimen of medication that was originally suggested by my general physician, who I'm very grateful to. I've seen her for the past now almost 5 years. I'll see her this week, and she's one of the first doctors that I've had as an adult, since I had a pediatrician, that really I felt was and is invested in my care and my well-being, emotional and physical. And she's seen me as I've struggled throughout many years with things that I have yet to even cover on this channel. And she was one of the first to really believe that I had PTSD and like severe anxiety, which are part and parcel to what I was later diagnosed with, of PTSD and autism, which the anxiety is a huge component as kind of a secondary symptom of the autism. Anxiety for me is a big one. But I think from there, the other thing I'll say is, so then there was this like honeymoon period of like, yay, I'm not a broken robot, I'm just autistic, and that's why I struggle. So like, it's not because I'm lazy, it's not because no medicines wanted to work for me, it's not because I didn't try hard enough, it's because it was the wrong diagnosis for most of my life, and therefore the completely wrong treatment, and therefore never any positive outcomes. So for a while I was like, wee, so hopeful, you know, and I'd seen all of the help that my daughter was getting at a young age, with this like early intervention. You know, at her school she has a speech and occupational therapist, and she has a IEP and an augmented schedule that allows her to do things at her own pace. She does see an ABA therapist where we work only on specific skills that we've both agreed are important for her and that she shows an interest in. I'm not interested in forcing eye contact or making her play in a specific way. I don't want some of the ways that I've heard ABA has maybe been problematic in the past to then be used in a way to further traumatize my daughter. So the therapist that I've had, treating my daughter for now almost a year, we've worked very closely, and I trust her very much, that she has my daughter's best interests at heart. And my child has, I think, shown that positively through her own behavior, through her excitedness to go, through her willingness to see this person, and her just general improvement of her own volition. You know, nobody's forcing her. She really has the ability but struggles, and there are some children that can never get beyond those struggles, or they don't have the ability, and it's not fair then to force them into situations of discomfort and pain just to measure up to neurotypical expectations. But I do think there are some children, like for example, if I had had early intervention services as a child, might have benefited, and like I have thus far witnessed my child benefiting from these services. But that is not to say that I believe every and all child historically throughout time has benefited from ABA services. I know it is a very hotly debated topic. I am very new to this as someone that never had early intervention and suffered in a different way without support systems. So I can't speak to what it was like 20 years ago. I can only speak to what it's like now as an autistic parent of an autistic child, and observing her reactions and knowing her in a sense almost like I know myself because she's been inside me. So I see a lot of positive coming from this, and for as long as it is that, then we will continue down that route for as long as it's effective for all of us. I think where it's gotten hard, and kind of where I wanted to get to in this video for as long as it's taken me to get to it, is kind of after the honeymoon period of diagnosis, at least for me. Then just the what has been since July, and maybe starting mostly in the winter months, probably not helped by like some kind of seasonal affective disorder, has been really more the grief and the depression of understanding that for so many years I received the wrong diagnosis and the wrong course of treatment, and I was in and out of hospitals over and over again, given different medications, trying different treatments, begging doctors for help, suffering continually, disintegrating in every job I tried. I mean, that's another story for another video, is how many jobs I've worked in the time that I've been capable of working, because we all know employment and autism don't always really go hand in hand very well. So that's still something that I'm now trying to figure out in my later adult life, because I tried for many years to do the 9 to 5 and all of those things and struggled. So I think it's important to say that at least for me, the way that it's gone was like a period of elation in having my daughter's diagnosis. And then in sometimes since then, it's been a struggle. Like, having the answers is only half of the, I don't want to say the fix, because there's nothing to fix necessarily in autism, but it's part of the knowledge in the solution to whatever you're gonna do to try to make things work for you and your family. But then the other half of that is then the grieving process of I would say not only myself and mourning the life that I feel in some ways I was deprived of because of the wrong diagnosis and the wrong medications that cause a host of issues that I'm not getting into this video, but also grieving things to do with my own child, and not in a way that's like judging her, but it's just the grief of having a child that is autistic like I am, yet very different in their autism, and then in other ways similar. You know, it's been a really humbling lesson, where I think in the beginning I thought, well, if anyone's going to be equipped to handle an autistic child, it would be an autistic parent more than anybody, because, we understand what it's like to be autistic. And in some ways, that's very true. I would say my empathy for my child goes deep, but then also the way that her autism can affect my autism is not fun, and the way that the energy draw and those sorts of things with the emotion regulation and just the things that she still can't do, how that also has affected me, not for the positive, and it's something that I'm working through, that my family and I are working through, because like I said, we are a support system and we support each other when one of us is struggling. A back goes out. Last week my back went out, my mom's ankle will go out, somebody else will take over and do what they can. So for now, that is the strategy that we've worked out, but it's not a sustainable strategy in the long term. My parents won't be here in the long term. And I think probably the last point I'll make before ending this video is, so far I think part of where the grief has come from too, in receiving the diagnosis after the initial like elation of having what I felt was an accurate name to what I'd been experiencing, was then finding that while there are services for adults with autism or autistic adults, those services are very limited. Those services are very much for those who have high support needs, which I have support needs, but I don't necessarily need, help getting to and from a place. I'm able to drive myself. It took me until I was 26 to learn how to drive, but I am now capable of driving myself. And while I rarely leave the house, I'm still capable of doing that. So part of the grief was sort of learning that many of the services that I was like magically hoping to find and connect with were either meant for people with more profound needs than myself, which I respect that there are those services out there, and I'm glad that they are there and exist for a reason, because my child may very well need them one day, or somebody else's child. But then there's also the grief, again, of knowing that having the quote unquote type of autism that I have is almost, for lack of a better term, on like such a subtler end of the spectrum that there really is no support to assist with that gap, of there's still a bridge from being autistic or neurodivergent to neurotypical. Even if you're on the lesser end or slighter end of the spectrum, it still means that there's something neurodevelopmentally divergent about you that causes you to struggle in ways that other people don't intrinsically. And for me, where it's hurt the most is that I've actually just been able to mask to my own detriment, where I can appear almost normal enough, but not normal enough in a sense to get first prize or to be first picked. I would always be second ring. I would always be, like second string, because it was good enough to have in a workforce or to have on a team, but I wasn't your A player. And I think it's like I've read and I've heard in other studies that neurotypical people are very able to quickly assess when someone is neurodivergent. They may not know that they're ADHD or that they have autism, or that they are autistic. I apologize if I don't get the language right. I'm really trying my best. but somehow neurotypical people can just smell it on us. And I've looked back on so many times where I just thought, I've got the outfit, I've got the makeup, I've got the smile down and the confident look, and I think I've got all the answers because I would have pages and pages of rehearsed answers to questions I thought I was going to be asked. This is like specifically usually regarding interviews. And then I would still make the second round. I would get the job, but I wasn't the first. And I specifically think about when I got my job at Square, which is now known as Block, the Bitcoin cash card, whatever it is, company. I don't even know what it does anymore. I started there in 2015 when they first came and opened up an office in my hometown. And that is a story for another time, because that was a huge wake up call, essentially, like reminder that I was very autistic, because it was a very unhealthy environment for me to be in specifically, and I'll get into more explanation of that later. But as it is now, we're at 31 minutes, and I think I have done a better job of more succinctly covering what it is I want to talk about, and not masking in any kind of real way that I think I'm aware of. Otherwise, I think I would try to be more like, like pretty and stuff. And instead, I feel like I look like my eyes are swollen from crying yesterday, and I sound stuffy. But I did take a shower and brushed my hair, although I don't think it really, at the end of the day, makes a difference. But I will make a cute or more intriguing, like, icon, whatever that thing is, for the video, so that hopefully maybe more people will click on this instead of just like the three people who did before. But I'm still very appreciative. One of them was probably at least me refreshing the page. Maybe it was two. But yeah, that's it for now. I'll try to come up with something else next time. I mean, I've got plenty to talk about. It's just a matter of finding the time and the ability to really articulate it in a way that it doesn't take a whole hour and make people go insane. So yeah, in the meantime, I hope if this was enjoyable to you, that you will like. For the algorithm, you will consider subscribing. Leave a comment if you have anything relevant to say. I'd love to hear it. I love dialogue. That's respectful. If it's rude, I'll delete it, because I am the dictator of this channel and it is the only thing I get to lord over. So let me have my little kingdom. But yeah, leave me a comment if it's respectful, and I would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, stay safe and be well. I'll talk to you next time. Goodbye.